Hello, I'm Layne Hartsell with the Korea IT Times. I'm here with Derrick Jensen, who's an ecophilosopher and prolific writer on actually many topics. And I'm so happy to uh, engage him in a series of talks on technics and civilization. Hi, Derrick. How are you tonight?
Hey, I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me on.
And I'm in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and he's near north of San Francisco. So it's nighttime over there. We had engaged in some discussions, particularly about Lewis Mumford's Technics and Civilization, the city and history, also around John Muir, Rachel Carson, and so forth. And there was a real, what you could say, a muscle, strength to that kind of environmentalism of the last century. And over probably the last 30 or 40 years, I would say, maybe a little less, it seems to have been co-opted and become a lot weaker. But I want to take the position of an optimistic perspective on, we have renewable energy today, and we want to have more of it. This is in the general media, mainstream. It might be said that everybody, or most everybody, knows about climate change in some form or another. In fact, when I'm in villages, people know about it, in Southeast Asia, Mexico, and so forth. We're being told that renewable energy is going to solve this. And it seems to me that if we can harness the sunlight, then we should be able to get away from fossils. And then you see a lot of things like the endowments are being under pressure to get rid of fossils. What's wrong with my argument?
Well, a few things. One of them is that it's beginning by solving for the wrong variable, in that what all of the so-called solutions to global warming have in common is they take industrial capitalism as a given, and the natural world is having to conform to industrial capitalism. And Bill McKibben just recently put out an article in the New Yorker in which he was saying that environmentalists are going to have to bend. And the thing that is never negotiable in these discussions is industrial energy usage. The thing that is always negotiable is that the world has to suffer. The world is what's being harmed. And industrial energy usage continues to rise. And did I tell you before in one of our conversations how I really sort of became an environmentalist in the first place in second grade? The sort of inciting incident?
I think you mentioned to maybe in some of our writings together, but I don't think we went over it last time in the interview.
It's just the short version is in second grade. So I was 7 years old, 8 years old, 6 years old, however old that is in second grade. And they put in a subdivision next to where I lived. And so all the meadows and meadowlarks and grasshoppers and cottonwood trees were all converted into a housing subdivision. And I remember thinking as a kid, they can't keep doing this forever, because where will the meadowlarks go? And I just finished reading a really interesting history of the Mississippi River from 1800 to 1865, 1870. And all of these histories, anytime I read a history of a place like that, it breaks my heart. And it wouldn't matter. We could do a history of, actually, I'm reading a book right now about the Philippines during World War II. And any history that runs from 1800 to 2000, or in Europe from 0 to 2000, is really the same story of conversion of the land into conversion of wild forests into fields and then into cities. And it's the same everywhere. The Mississippi was wild, and by the end, it is completely contained and channelized. And I have never understood Okay, so now we'll advance into to when I'm about 30, and all the environment, I'm a sort of baby environmentalist and young activist, and all of the grassroots activists I know, they'll be using the tools of the system the best they can, but they're all basically just hanging on by their fingertips, hoping and praying that bull trout or Kootenai sturgeon or Selkirk caribou survive until civilization collapses. Because there's this recognition, we all understand that that the entire system is converting the living into the dead. And I mean, I did an interview recently, and I've done interviews about this before, about the Mekong Delta catfish. And at one point, not even very long ago, the Mekong catfish was the largest animal migration by weight on the planet, bigger than the Serengeti, bigger than the buffalo, because these huge catfish would all go up and down the Mekong. And they're in trouble. And I asked the person I was just interviewing recently, so when did the trouble with the Mekong Delta catfish start? And she's like, 30 years ago? It's very, very recent. And okay, so first off, solving for the wrong variable, in that I also needed to say explicitly, the health of the planet has to be primary, because without a healthy planet, you don't have any economic system whatsoever. All economic systems are dependent upon a healthy environment. Another way to think about this is that if there are any humans left 150 years from now, what they're going to care about is whether they can drink the water and breathe the air, and whether the land will support them. That's the basis from which everything comes. So that's the first problem, is they're solving for the wrong variable. The second problem is that when they talk about using renewable energy, what they're generally talking about actually is electricity, because wind and solar they can only provide electricity. They can't. Okay, I'm going to go a different direction for a second. One of the things that's extraordinary about fossil fuels, and I want to be clear, I'm not arguing for fossil fuels here. But one of the things that's extraordinary about fossil fuels is that it's incredibly energy dense. It's millions of years of sunlight hitting the ground, being converted into various beings, algae, whatever, and then compressed under certain geologic conditions to make a highly energy dense substance. So that diesel fuel, for example, I believe is 46 megajoules per kilogram. And 46 is accurate. I just don't remember. I think it's megajoules per kilogram. Now, the best sort of lithium batteries people can make at this point are like 1 megajoule per kilogram. So the point is that you have a semi-truck, a big truck right now with about 600 pounds of diesel fuel. I'm sorry, with a tank full of diesel fuel, it can go about 600 miles. And for the same payload, to carry 60,000 pounds would take 55,000 pounds of batteries to go 600 miles. So it's not very energy dense. So it can't replace it very well. But that's okay. Let's pretend that it could. And if it could replace it, there's this thing called Jevin's paradox, which is Jevin was an economist in the 19th century who studied the coal question, as he put it. And the coal question was, if they find more efficient ways to use coal, will that reduce coal usage? Which you'd think, because let's say that you are using coal to heat a meal. You light it on fire and then you cook whatever your food is, and that's all fine. They find a way that you can use half as much coal to cook your dinner. Great. So your coal expenses are half as much now. The problem is that's not how it works in business. What happens in business is that increased efficiency in use leads to increased demand because people find more uses for it. And the uses are more economical. So let's say instead of you just using it for your own personal cooking, Instead, you have a business, and let's say half of your expenses are energy, are coal or oil or whatever. And let's say they find out, or electricity, doesn't matter. And they find a way to cut those costs in half. What's going to happen is you will probably expand your business because that cost has decreased. All the others stay the same. Shoot, let's just go as much. So we will now spend the same on coal as we used to. We got twice as big a business. We got twice as much profit. And this is not me just speculating. They've done studies on this, and this is true basically for every resource. So if they drop if they can drop the price of copper, that means people use more copper. If they drop the price of zinc, if they drop the price of various plastics, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. This applies. There's only a couple, it's very interesting, and this is kind of off topic, but it's interesting to me at least, that there was a couple, I think it was like 6, something like that, not very many materials for which the demand has actually gone down over the last 50 years. One of them is asbestos, for obvious reasons. That had nothing to do with Jevin's paradox. Another one is wool. Interestingly, wool demand has gone down some, but that's primarily because of plastics. Oh, it's interesting. I wonder, I don't know if they've done this study, but hemp, by which I'm not talking about cannabis to smoke, I'm talking about hemp for rope. I'll bet hemp use has gone down over the past 50 years because of plastics too, because hemp was the absolute staple of all sorts of economies. Anyway, we're getting off in the thicket. Sorry about that, which I do all the time.
Okay,
but
the
point is that even if they were able to bring on all sorts of great new energy sources, that would simply lead to increased energy demand. It does not replace. The industrial economy is using more fossil fuels now than they were X number of years ago. One more thing to say about this is that this has been true for every energy source. So they used the original sources of energy used by humans were human and non-human slavery. That's through ox carts or horses or mules or water buffalo or whatever, and then also humans. And then the next one to add was wood. And then when they added when they added coal onto wood, it didn't decrease wood use. Wood use went up. Coal use was added on top. When they found oil use was added on top of that. When they added hydro, that's on top of that. When they added nuclear, every one just adds on top of the previous ones. And this is an incredibly energy intensive. This is a one-time blowout of high use energy. And
well,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me push back, because the argument is that, with science and capitalism, and then of course, democracy and progress, that we're supposed to be living better than we would have, say, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So if someone has this particular perspective, then they're going to want to invest in these new in technologies and so forth. Why is this not good?
Well, it depends on your perspective. It is good from the perspective of, the fact that you and I can have this conversation. That's great. And the fact that I'm sitting on a couch and you can see the couch here, and I've got electric lights, and you're sitting somewhere with drapes, and you've got, it looks like mosquito netting behind you or something. And that's, the problem is that it's not, well, there's a bunch of problems. One of them is it's not sustainable. One problem is that these benefits are not given to all. There are a lot of traditional people living traditionally who, for example, are losing their land and losing their ways of life because of the dams on the Mekong River is a great example, that they no longer have that option of living as they have for a long, long time. But there's another problem too, which is, yes, this way of life is incredibly addictive. And given a choice, I'd rather have electric lights than not. But me wanting electric lights does not mean that they're sustainable, and does not mean that the entire grid will last. It doesn't mean that any of this is or has ever been sustainable. And again, this is only talking about humans. So when we add blue whales to the mix, and when we add Mekong Delta catfish to the mix, and when we add grizzly bears to the mix, or bison, or whatever non-humans we want to, it looks a little bit different. It's like asking, of course we like this way of life because we're the primary beneficiaries of it. But all of my work is really based around the question of, or the statement, I could sum it all up, all 27 or 28 books in, this way of living won't last. And when it's over, I would rather there's more of the world left rather than less. And
okay, let me go with economics first. Okay, let's say I'm an investor and I want to get some kind of mineral from, say, Central Africa. And there are, there's some people there, they're uncivilized, and, well, the government's authoritarian and they do have some massacres, but overall, I mean, the slavery there isn't too bad, people's lives are increasing, and, maybe they have some smartphones. But I have a chance to get in there and get at some lithium, for example. I don't know if lithium is in there, maybe rare earth minerals. And I can go in with, say, $1 billion. Yeah, I mean, it's going to, it's going to kill off some people because we have to clear the land to mine. But these are not like, Ukrainians, for example. They're white people and they're civilized. Why can't we just go into Africa and do this? I mean, this is an economic model that we have today, and it works for me.
Well, it's even worse than that, because the argument is that by providing them with development, you're actually, it's basically it's the white man's burden of raising them up out of their savagery.
No, but I'm giving them jobs, yeah.
Oh, I know, that's that, and in so doing, and you're also realistically solving some health problems. You're bringing some modern medicine to people who didn't have it before. You are, one hopes, bringing clean water, although that's problematical too, since a lot of places, a great example of why that's not really true is that I knew this woman who used to be married to a guy from Bangladesh, and they're our age. And when he was a kid, when he was in his teens, his mom would say, go down to the river and get us a fish for lunch. And he would go fish and bring back a fish and they would have lunch. And now the river is so polluted that they can't get fish there and they have to import their fish from Iceland. And so on one hand, we can say, yes, this is really, bringing a lot of modern conveniences and modern health benefits to a lot of people. But it's also bringing river blindness in Africa from the reservoirs. It's bringing, it's dispossessing people. I don't know if I've told you this before, but I was getting interviewed a few years ago. I love this conversation. The guy was a dedicated Marxist who believed that it was possible to have an industrial economic system that was based on purely voluntary exchanges with no exploitation of anyone whatsoever. And
we talked about this one before.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, go with it, because it's how do you build a bus, with getting people to agree with you?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I said, how do you get around your city? He said, with a bus. So where do you get the materials? He said, from a mine. I said, how do you get people to work in the mine? He said, you just pay them a lot. I said, well, mining was really the first form of slavery, and people, for the most part, do not go into mines voluntarily, but I'll give you that. You just pay them a ton. But every hard rock mine on the planet pollutes groundwater. And so what about people who live on the river next to the mine? What about them? So you pay them to leave. I said, well, what if they don't want to leave? He said, you pay them more. I said, what if their ancestors are buried there? They've lived there for 5,000 years and they refuse to leave. And he says, how many are there? I said, I don't know, 500. He said, well, the 1 million people in the city vote, and they vote to have the 500 people kicked off their land so you can put in the mine. And I said, so you've gone, within 1 minute, you've gone from purely voluntary exchanges to democratic empire, land theft from indigenous people, and genocide, also you can have a bus. And the point is that these are inherent in the system. And again, I don't want to downplay the importance of what Mumford called the Magnificent Bribe. He asked, how is it that so many of us have given up control of our lives? So a lot of people work jobs they don't like. A lot of people spend, I mean, you have one lifetime. And when I was about 20, I would ask people, do you like your job? I just had this weird sort of hobby. I would ask people on buses, just anywhere. And about 90% said no. And I was thinking when I was a kid, when I was 20, what does it mean when the vast majority of people spend the vast majority of their waking hours doing things they don't want to do? And whom does the system really serve? And the system serves itself. I didn't have Mumford's analysis yet. I read Mumford much later. But Mumford basically is saying the same thing, that at some point, the technologies take over so that we're actually serving the fossil fuel system. We're actually serving the industrial system. And yes, so then he asks, how is it that we have surrendered control of our lives to this system? And he says the answer is what he calls the Magnificent Bribe, that basically in exchange for access to ice cream 24/7, access to all the consumer goods of whatever types that can be put into a grocery store, into any sort of general store. In exchange for that, we give up everything to the system, and we give up life itself on the planet. And so I can go to the grocery store and I can look at the meat section, and you don't eat meat, right?
Very little.
Okay, well, in any case, I can go to the meat section and I can see, it's like, I don't know, 80 feet long. It's huge.
Right.
I can't go to the river. I can no longer go to the stream that literally is 30 yards this way. I can't go to that stream and catch salmon anymore because the salmon are gone. It's the same story as the one in Bangladesh, that we can buy stuff through the system. But it's really interesting because the population where I live is, I think the county is like 25 or 30,000. And prior to conquest, because there were so many salmon here, the population of what is now this county was like 12 or 13,000. The population hasn't really gone up much here, but that's because there was so much food here. Other places obviously had a lot fewer people because there's less food. But the point is that, so this is also really important because in the 1830s, there was an exchange between a Southern pro-slavery philosopher and his Northern abolitionist buddy about slavery. And the Southern pro-slavery philosopher said, look, we would give up our slaves in a heartbeat if we could arrange land ownership conditions so that it was optimal. And it's really simple. He made a brilliant argument, which was, of course, really evil because he's talking about slavery, but it's very straightforward. If you've got a lot of land and not many people, the only way you can get people to work for you is at the point of a gun, because they have access to land, which means they have access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means they have access to self-sufficiency, which means they don't want to work for you. On the other hand, if you have a lot of people and not much land, then people don't have access to land, which means they don't have access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means they don't have access to self-sufficiency, which means they have to go to work for you for whatever pittance you want to pay them. And so that's another part of it, is we have enslaved ourselves to the system. I'm using a lot of words to basically say the same thing that Daniel Quinn said, which was that one of the problems is that we have made ourselves dependent for our very lives upon a system that is destroying the planet. And so, yeah, it's wonderful that we have, that I can have a cat, that's great. And that's great that I can have houseplants. And it's great that, I can have access to modern medicine, and it's great that I can go to the store and buy some food. But what are the costs? We need to think about, okay, I don't like this phrase, but it's an important one, full cost accounting. And the reason I don't like the phrase is because it still has everything put in dollars and cents. And so full cost accounting usually just says, oh, that means that it costs more for human ecosystem services or something. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the system is based on privatizing benefits, privatizing profits, and externalizing costs. And I mean, it's great. Wouldn't it be great if you, Layne, could get rich and all you had to do was poison, 10,000 people you're never going to see? It's like, that's really what we're talking about.
That's my argument, though. As an investor, that's my argument. If I can go into that place in, say, Central Africa and get those, I can get those earth metals, that, and then I can provide people with the cell phones, and they get the internet and all of that. And yes, I know that maybe 10,000 people got killed when we were doing this. Okay, I mean, we had to get, you hire these groups that are like military, they're like police off duty. They'll kill off some of the indigenous people because those people are fighting back, and they're just Marxist anyway. So we just get rid of them. Now we've got a situation where, yeah, it is still slavery because people are working in our mines, but the system is still under control of their own people, and we pay them well. They get some Ferraris and stuff, but we just don't talk about that. And we're bringing them up to civilization, and the people in wealthy countries get these really nice technological goods. I mean, really, haven't you seen some of the just most beautiful design that we have today on technology?
Well, it's cool. Computers. I bought my first computer in 1980. I don't know, 1982 or something, and it was like $1,500 in 1982 dollars. And that's, yep. So they're really cheap, and it didn't have any memory, or it had the big floppy disk, and yeah. It was just, and yeah, so it's just amazing how much more they can do, but that's not really the point. And the point that I think both of us seem to be making is that the logic is really inescapable, and it's highly, highly addictive. And if I have a choice between buying, oh God, this is so funny, because this is an example that I've been using for 25 years. And my example used to be that if I can buy a hard drive that costs, $500 that was made under semi-decent conditions, or $300 that was made under sweatshop conditions. But the thing that's funny about that is, of course, buying a hard drive right now, it's crazy. This would never cost $300. They're so much cheaper now. But the point really is that if I have a choice between buying something that costs X amount or buying something that costs 2X amount, most people, most of the time, myself included, are going to buy the X amount versus the 2X amount if they're otherwise identical. And I don't know the people who were harmed in the making of it. I don't know the non-humans who were harmed. And that's whether we buy it at all, too. And the important thing to remember is that what GNP really is a measure of how quickly you're converting the living to the dead. Because a school of fish, or all those fish in the Mekong River, they don't count anything. They count zero until they're caught, filleted, and sold. And then they're counted as part of the GNP. That's what it is. And
well, right. In our hypothetical village there in Africa, I'm really concerned about the people, right? There's some fish in the rivers, and they do go belly up and they die, but they don't really do it for me. I mean, we're really bringing these people out of, you know, uncivilized, just bush people, and we're giving them lights and maybe a few smartphones and, you know, all of that. But, and, you know, we cut down some trees. That's okay too, right?
You know, we're a couple things on this, and you're raising really important points, because you are so accurately describing the mindset that is driving everything. And you said it doesn't do it for you. And that was actually a line that Naomi Klein used in This Changes Everything. She said, ultimately, the polar bears don't do it for her. This stopping global warming is about us. And that's part of the problem, is that everybody's expendable. Everybody on the planet's expendable except for us, except for some of us. That's part of it. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I want to go to Mars one day too. So, I mean, I have my aspirations. See,
that's part of the problem, is we want ice cream 24/7. And that's not the right question, because I can want all sorts of things. The real question is, what can the Earth afford? There's only one planet, and what can it afford? And, you know, part of the reason that I ended up writing all the stuff I did is simply because I can see trends. And if you have uncountable salmon, and then you have estimated millions of salmon, and then you have estimated hundreds of thousands of salmon, and then you have estimated 80,000 salmon, I can see where that's going. Anybody can see where that's going. And, you know, when people think of Iraq, is the first thing they think of cedar forest so thick that sunlight never touched the ground? That's what it was like prior to the beginnings of civilization. The first written myth of Western civilization is Gilgamesh deforesting the hills and valleys of Iraq to make a city.
Yeah.
And it's the same across the Mediterranean was thickly forested. North Africa, they were taken down to for the Phoenician and Egyptian navies. There were penguins in, people get mad at me, but I'm going to correct this. There were penguins in France and in Europe. They weren't actually penguins, they were great auks, but ecologically, they served the same function. They were flightless birds who looked quite a bit like penguins. And in Portuguese, their name was penguin, which means the fat one, because they were really fat birds. Like penguins can be really fat, they have to be. Anyway, they were in Europe, and they were wiped out in the 19th century. The point is, it's systematically converting, and I don't understand why people can't see the pattern, but I can, because there's a great line by Upton Sinclair. It's hard to make a man understand something when his job depends on him not understanding it. And I would change that to, it's hard to make people understand something when their privilege depends on them not understanding it. And I'm going to say something now that's going to get me in big trouble, but it's just the truth, which is, I remember 30 years ago, I was in a car with a friend of mine, George Draffin, and we're just chatting away. And he says, you know, in North America, after the Europeans arrived, Indians actually killed more beavers than white people did. And I said, God, George, that's really racist to say that. He said, no, history is not racist. I mean, it just, facts aren't racist. This is just true. And he said, besides which, I'm not saying anything bad about the Indians. What I'm saying is that when you introduce metal and guns to the Indians, but you made them pay for them, they wanted those things. They became addicted to them. In that book I was just mentioning about the Mississippi, as soon as the metal pots came in, within about 60 years or 50 years, some of the nations in the northern Mississippi, they were saying, had lost their millennia-old traditions of pottery, because nobody's going to make a pot when you can just buy one. But, well, so I got to kill a couple of beaver to buy them, you know, big deal. And the point is that the point George was making, that I think is a really important one, is I was really upset. But I was upset because I actually had sort of a racist notion, which was that there was something magical about these people, that they would not do something to harm the land. And he said, George said, all I'm saying is that technology and culture are intertwined. And as soon as you introduce guns, as soon as you introduce pots, you're going to change the culture. That will ramify all throughout until hundreds of years later, or in the case of Asian or European civilizations or Middle Eastern civilizations, thousands of years later, until people can no longer even remember that there was ever a way where we didn't serve the things that are supposed to serve us. I mean, I have big problems with Diogenes, the Greek cynic. There are many ways that I don't like him, but he said some things that were great. And one of them is he articulated that our possessions, we don't possess our possessions so much as we're possessed by them. And I love that, both in terms of, I mean, for crying out loud, I have a car and I have to pay for this car, and I have to work in order to pay for this car. And, you know, I've got this house that I have to pay for. I got this computer I had to pay for, and I had to sell my hours in order to do that. And we all do that, and we just accept that that's a part of life. And I'm not saying that we should all sit at home and, I mean, it kind of cracks me up, and a lot of anarchists don't like me when I say this, but you know, we can't all be dumpster diggers. I've done my share of dumpster digging and I enjoy it, but we can't all be dumpster diggers parasitizing off the system. You know, at some point, the system, there can be a few parasites on the system, but the system itself, that doesn't work for everybody. My point is that we have a system that is highly addictive, and we have become addicted to, and I'm not saying this like slamming it. It's just, I mean, I would be dead without modern medicines. And
me too.
At the same time, I recognize that my health is not more important than life on the planet. And then people say, well, gosh, Derrick, stop taking the medicines. It's like, that's part of the problem, is that individually, I could reduce my consumption to zero. I could just kill myself, reduce my consumption to zero. That's not going to stop the system. In order to stop the system, we need to stop the system. And if you want, we can certainly talk about the importance of coming up with alternatives in the meantime, which is important too. But there's one more thing that I want to mention, that, you know, when you said that we were going to do this, have this conversation, one of the things that you had brought up was the idea of having sort of a global eco-society. And there's one point that I really need to make about this, or I want to make about this, that is, people ask me all the time, okay, yeah, I recognize the system is really destructive, it's killing the planet, it's doing this, it's doing that, but what do you want to replace it with? And the answer for me is that I don't want to replace it with any one thing, because I don't believe any global system can ever be sustainable. There's a few reasons for this. One of them is that no matter how abundant some resource is, by which I mean some group community of fish or group of bears or anything else, no matter how abundant they are, nothing on the planet can support a global demand. You know, the fish on the Columbia River were starting to, their populations were crashing before they put in the first dams. You know, I'm known for railing against dams, but they were already going down because of the canning factories. Because not even something as hugely abundant as the salmon populations could support a globalized demand. And there's an example of this from 15 years ago. I wrote this in Endgame that just blew me away when I learned it. There was somebody wrote to me from Canada and said that she had used to see grizzly bears like 3 or 4 a day, and now she'd see 1 or 2 a season. She said the difference was that local hunters had discovered the market, the Chinese market for bear gallbladders. And so even something as esoteric as bear gallbladders, all the way across the world, I mean, you would think that the demand wouldn't be that great, but it was great enough to destroy the grizzlies in her community. Nothing can support that. That's the first problem. The next problem is there have been people who have said to me, So gosh, Derrick, couldn't you have like a global Christianity or global Buddhism or global Islam? It doesn't matter. And I always respond that the purpose of a religion, there's a few purposes. One is to help us experience the divine, however you perceive that, the great mystery of the planet, to experience awe. That's one of the purposes. Another purpose is to help us get along. Rules, thou shalt not steal, whatever. It's like, just how do I get along with my neighbors? And then another purpose is to tell you how to live in place. And that's one of the places you run into problem. Well, you also run into problem with how do you get along, because it's much easier to get along with your neighbor in some ways than it is somebody you don't see across the world. We've been talking about that the whole conversation. But another part about that is that if you have, let's just say for the sake of argument that Christianity was a great idea, or Judaism or whatever, it doesn't matter. It was a great idea, but it emerged from a specific place. And telling you how to live in, well, let's go with the United States. Telling you how to live in the desert of what's now Arizona would not tell you how to live in the rainforest of Northern California. And so I don't think you can have a globalized system. You can have some things in common, like, don't unnecessarily beat each other up or something. I don't know. I mean, there are some general rules, sort of the golden rule type stuff that could be used around. But in terms of living in place and in terms of experiencing, the divine, or if you don't like the term, the divine, experiencing awe, those are going to be local. Those are going to be localized. And another problem with all this is that, when I did my book Dreams in 2009 or whenever it was, there was this line I responded to by Sam Harris where he said, even the most educated people in the 15th century would be considered a complete ignoramus now. And we're so much smarter now and more educated. And I'm like, well, no. We know things like I can tell you that the capital of Mongolia is Ulaanbaatar, however you pronounce it, but I can't. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and don't worry, because I'm also putting myself on the spot. What phase is the moon right now, Layne?
Where I'm at, I don't know.
Yeah, I got no clue. There's a moon, but I don't know. And where did the moon rise and set? A 6-year-old would have known that. Or like, can you identify 10 species of edible plants and fungi? You might be able to actually where you live. Yeah. You might be able to.
I could. Yeah.
Most people can't do that. I can't do that. I live in berry country. It's like, so I've got it easy because like blackberries, huckleberries, salal, thimbleberries. I mean, I got berries and I can only do 4.
Chestnuts and everything probably there.
No, it's not chestnut here.
You don't have chestnuts?
No. But anyway, the point is that our knowledge has become globalized too, so that we can, I can tell you that the San Diego baseball team is called the San Diego Padres, but can I name, the species of plants that are 50 feet outside my door? Probably not. And so
yeah.
Our form of education has become, not education, but our form of information has become globalized too. And I just learned, and I can't remember how it is, but like literally 3 weeks ago, I'm more than 60 years old. And I just learned that you can tell whether the moon is waxing or waning by which side the dark part is. How did I get to be 60 without, and somebody told me that. Somebody said, if you pay attention, I think that it goes across the moon like this. So it's waxing when it's over here and waning when it's over here, the dark part, I think. But how did they get to be 60? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
So, that's crazy. That's crazy. Literally a 6-year-old, every 6-year-old on the planet would have known that 500 years ago. And it's like, well, that's all fine. But the point is that we don't know where we live.
Right.
And you probably do better than many people because you live on land and you live with the land.
But I'll move out of my role as taking the progressive investor now and just speak as a philosopher, but yeah, what you're saying is the sense of place and the way to, I think, move to an eco society, which we're going to have to do. Whether we achieve it or not is another question. But I think the way to do that is the sense of place. And then, it goes to localism and regionalism and getting your food, from that area. And we've talked about Tertullian in the past. When Tertullian describes the little cottages and the little villages, he's still within, the patriarchs are still within a regionalism that still hasn't gone to this kind of industrial capitalism thing that we have now. It's not like it wasn't bad then. They were still cutting down the trees, but it wasn't as destructive. And I think that, yeah, I'm going to have to check the phases of the moon now. We don't plant by the moon though. We go by the seasons because it's hot and damn hot here. But anyway.
Yeah, so I want to be clear. I'm not saying you can't have an eco society. What I'm saying is that a globalized eco society, what I would eventually strive for, and which is what we'll have, or we won't have anything, is a multitude of local eco societies. They can be linked. They can. I just was reading in that history of the Mississippi River. I was reading they had some stuff about the mound builders from, they were 1,500 years ago or something, 1,000 years ago. Anyway, they said that they found, I don't remember what it was, but they found stuff from the head of the Mississippi, which is way up in Minnesota, and they found stuff in the same mound. They found stuff from the Gulf of Mexico, and they found stuff from as far west as Colorado. I don't remember how far east. So the point is they traded, but I've talked about this, that no way of, so I've talked about how any way of life that's based on the importation of resources can never be sustainable, because that means you've denuded the landscape of that particular resource. So if you have to import food, it means you will never be sustainable. That doesn't mean you can't have trade, but it's for non-essentials. Mm-hmm. If you're having to import food, you're reliant on those other places, which means that that if they won't trade you for it, you're going to take it, which means you have to be militarized if you require the importation of resources. And, but you could still, I don't know what they would have traded from here. They could certainly have traded, shells locally for, I don't know, buffalo robes are too far away here, but I'm not saying there can't be any trade. What I'm saying is that if your way of life requires the importation of resources, it's going to require the entire system that we see around us, which is the system that is destroying the planet. But again, it's difficult that we have to have these conversations because, again, this way of life is incredibly addictive, and it's Jack Forbes, American Indian guy, talked about how that the dominant culture was based on a highly infectious or highly communicable disease. And it was a disease of the mind, a disease of way of looking at the world, so that what you got was more important than the harm that was caused by what you got. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think it's a really important perspective. And one of the ways I think this can be transmissible is just the introduction of, I keep saying the same thing, introduction of ice cream 24/7. I say that, by the way, as somebody who, because of my age, can no longer really eat ice cream, which is probably why I keep repeating it, because ice cream 24/7 is a delightful thing. It's just, again, that's why I'm not meaning to bash everybody over the head. It's like gravity. We can want to step off a building and hope that we don't fall off of it, or we can hope we can step off a cliff, hope we don't land. But Bill McKibben has a great line about you can't argue with physics. And
well, if you're a human, if you take a Humean absolute skepticism, then we don't know what's going to happen in the next moment. So, okay, why not step off the building?
Well, that's true, and that's a good way to fall off and die, and which is what we're seeing on a global scale. You know, that I mean, I just was having an argument today with somebody who doesn't believe who doesn't believe that who believed you can have essentially infinite human population growth. And it's just, and I asked him, so is it only humans, or does this also apply to bacteria in a petri dish? Can they expand infinitely, or are humans magical? I mean, if you have deer on an island with no wolves and they keep having babies, can that go on infinitely? It's just who was it? Was it Bartlett, I believe, who said the great sorrow of our time, or he has a much better line than this, but basically the great sorrow of our time is people's inability to understand exponential growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's the fundamental point. Yeah, this is a nice party, but it can't go on forever. And it's a nice party for some of us, by the way, not for all of us, but it can't go on forever. And that's what I like.
Something was released recently in the economic reports. This was like, I guess, government or maybe Bloomberg or whatever. It said if you don't make $300,000 a year, you might want to consider cutting back and taking, public transportation, which in the United States is awful. But also maybe don't eat meat, eat some lentils. And, these were the recommendations. I thought, well, that's interesting. So rich people, okay, we get to eat salmon. But the regular people, let them eat it, let them eat lentils. So on the internet, there's all these memes about lentils.
Well, and it's very interesting that I didn't predict this, but there are some other people who did, that there's been this push the last many years to mainstream eating insects. And I know that there are some cultures that eat a lot of insects. That's fine. Whatever. That's
my family. My family.
And just out of curiosity, what sort of insects do they eat?
They eat those grasshoppers. They've been eating these things for 2 millennia. I mean, it's.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm not. I want to be really clear. I'm not.
And silkworms too.
How do they taste?
Well, look. They have to grind those things up to give it to me, but I have eaten them just to try it. The silkworms are. It's just salty, just like salt. Those are salty and squishy, like a marshmallow, salty marshmallow. But the grasshoppers are like potato chips.
Probably better for me than potato chips. Well, there's one more thing I want to say before I get to my point. The thing I wanted to say is that when I was a beekeeper in my 20s and early 30s, a couple times I ate some bee grubs because a hive had been ripped apart by bears, and bears mainly go after them for the grubs, not for the honey. I mean, the honey's great, but they really want the grubs. And I thought, well, if the bears like the grubs, I should try them. And they had destroyed a hive, so the bees were going to die anyway. So what the heck? I'm going to eat a grub. I didn't like it. It was kind of chalky. So I don't agree with the bears on that one. Anyway, my point is not with people locally eating them. I've been seeing it more and more being pushed as a larger scale. Here's what I'm trying to get at, is that you've already seen this with fish, that the fish that a lot of people eat now are what were once considered the trash fish, because they fished off the best tasting ones, then the second best, and the second best, or the third best. So the person I saw predicting that insects are going to be brought to Western society was based on, we're working our way down because we've already got the good stuff. It's the same as what's already happened with ocean fish.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You mean it's going to the rich countries, whereas when I hear this stuff, I say, oh yeah, my family's been eating that stuff for millennia. You know what they do, Derrick? There are these like ants that live in the trees. And they will, the Thai people, they'll go up and they get these ant nests, and in the ant nests are these larvae, and they eat the larvae, and also they eat the bees like that too, the bee things. So yeah, it's common where I live.
Right. Well, maybe when I ate those bee grubs, I just had a bad taste in my mouth because they didn't taste very good to me.
But like I said, they have to grind that stuff up and put it in some kind of mixture for me to eat it. But yeah, it's all right.
Well, anyway,
Well,
back to the original topic. It's really just I don't understand. I see from within the perspective of, so rationalize has a couple meanings. One meaning of rationalization is, I rationalize why I did this terrible thing. We all know that version. There's another version of the word, and another meaning of the word that's very interesting, which is to rationalize a process, which is that's how the assembly line is a rationalized process. And what it means in that sense is to ignore or get rid of everything that is not germane to your central point. And the scientific method is kind of based on that what you want to do with an experiment is you reduce everything down so you're only playing with one variable. Very, very powerful tool. The problem is that when we take it outside of a laboratory and we forget that there's a real world where there are other considerations. So if you rationalize your investment, by which, again, I'm not saying the means of rationalizing bad behavior, although it could certainly work that way. But instead, if all you care about is making money on your investment, then you can rationalize, in the other sense, this terrible behavior. Years ago, I talked to Yvon Chouinard, who is the runner, he's the founder of Patagonia, the company. And Patagonia is actually, if you're going to have a company, and in our conversation, he recognizes, you can't have a global company that's sustainable. We're all clear on that. But insofar as a company, they do a lot of good things. And they actually are their heart is in the right place. They have saved so much land. They do great work. And I asked him, so how is it that you've run this company for so long and you're still able to keep the company doing great things? And he said, we're not publicly traded. So basically, it's his family owns it and they can do whatever the hell they want. And so they can keep it. Yes, again, they protected a lot of land. I said, wow, thank you so much for protecting the land. And he said, and we were having a very nice meal when he said this. When I said that to him, he said, look at this table. I'm not hurting. It's like, I'm doing some great things. But my point is that if it had to follow, there is no way a company can follow the rules of publicly traded companies where they have to maximize return on investment. There is no way they can serve communities, nature. They can't even do a half-assed job of it because they have to
actually, by law, they're supposed to serve the stakeholder, the shareholders. It has to make a profit. That is the focus.
Yep.
By law.
And so what that means is, by law, it has to push off externalities onto local communities. And that's a system that can never be sustainable. It cannot be sustainable. And people say, gosh, Derrick, if you say that system can never be sustainable, what do you want us to do? Just kill ourselves? And I'm always like, no. It's like a doctor friend of mine said.
Why is people lack imagination? Why is suicide the only other option that we have to try to?
Because, okay, here's part of the problem is, over the last several years, I've seen any number of mainstream news articles with mainstream people saying that they believe humans could go extinct within 100 years. Like, I think Richard Dawkins,
the physicists are saying this.
Yeah. Okay. So my point is that they can talk in a straightforward fashion about humans possibly going extinct in 100 years. But when I say we need to end civilization, they say I'm crazy. And my point is that they have identified more closely with civilization, with this way of life, than they have with human existence even. But human
Mhm.
existence is not civilization.
Right.
Civilization is a very specific, and I need to be clear on this because a lot of people don't understand it. I'm not saying, okay, what I am saying, all humans make culture. Humans are a storytelling animal.
Yep.
I don't know if bears are storytelling animals or not. I have no idea. I'm not a bear, but I know humans are. And
Mhm.
we make culture, and that's
Right.
just making social norms. In this culture, we're going to say, oh, it's like I was just writing about this recently. There's a culture in Africa where only men harvest yams. And there's one of the cultures in Australia where only the women harvest yams. And I don't actually care who harvests yams. But the point is that is one thing a culture might decide. And
Right.
it's not just sex-based, it's also with other stuff too. You know, some cultures are very warlike, some are not. Cultures,
Right.
all humans create culture, whether they end up worshiping bears or whether they end up hating bears, it doesn't matter. But not all cultures make civilization. Civilization is a very specific type of culture
Yes.
based on
Right.
the rise of cities. And civilization, there has never been a civilization based on cities that has been sustainable. There have been plenty of cultures that are sustainable, but
Mhm.
there's never been a city-based culture that is sustainable. And my point here is that people can more easily accept human extinction than they can accept the possibility of this particular culture ending. And I'm not saying that this particular culture ending is going to be pretty. I mean, we are seeing it around us.
Pretty
And
ugly.
but there's something I think about all the time, which is, not I don't think about all the time, but I think about quite often, which is when I was a kid, I was very messy, still am. And like, here's my papers. The entire house is not that messy, just there. Anyway, when I was a kid, my mom said, clean your room. And I didn't do it. She said, clean your room. I didn't do it. She said, clean your room. I didn't do it. And she said, okay, if you don't clean your room before dinner, I'm going to clean it up. And if I clean it up, you're not going to like it because I'm throwing everything away. And I cleaned my room. And the point is, nature will stop this way of life. We have choices. We can intentionally try to throttle things down. We can try to save wild places. We can try to come up with alternative ways to live in the meantime as we throttle this down, or we can let nature do it, in which case we are not going to like it. And
Going back, going
okay.
back to civilization, organized human societies and culture, everybody has it. I mean, there's no, I don't know of any case where there, unless there's like a hermit or something, but that's not usual, right?
But that's also not sustainable, because if he's a
And
hermit,
that's
if he or she is a hermit, by definition, they're not having children.
right. It's not sustainable. And so by organized human society, I think that people, because organized human society is going to have rules and roles, right? You can't just kill everybody off. And, you know, so the other one is civilization. I think people are confusing that what they're calling civilization is more like, you know, what came about with the Enlightenment, particularly the radical humanism of the Enlightenment, right? So that's what, in the past, I referred to that as civilization, because obviously I live as a monk, so it's not like I was involved in massive extraction. But what you helped me to understand, and this is before actually we met, is that civilization has a specific definition found in urbanization. So that I stopped using that years ago. But I was using it, and a lot of people use it in that sense of that radical humanism of the Enlightenment.
A lot of people do. And it's the reason I'm comfortable with the definition. I mean, I'm comfortable with the definition that I use, both historically and linguistically, because we talk about civilization starting with the rise of cities. And then also linguistically, civilization comes from the kivitetos, which means city or state.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem, and yeah, so humans have existed in a tremendous variety of cultures. And there are some of those cultures have had tremendous records on human rights.
Mhm.
Records is probably the wrong word because they weren't literate, so they didn't keep records.
Iroquois Federation compared to, say, the Northwestern Indians that were slave owners.
The Hopi were traditionally very
No.
peaceful, and yeah, you know, and the Northwestern tribes were there was a mix, because I know that the Indians who lived near Seattle, what's now Seattle, they were fairly peaceful, but they would also have to run to the hills every time the Indians came down from Victoria in their war canoes, because they would enslave them. So and there's a really, really good book on, well, there's a couple things on this. One of them is Ruth Benedict wrote a chapter called, I can't remember what it's called, but she wrote a chapter in one of Abraham Maslow's books. His book is called something like The Furthest Reaches of Human Experience, or
Yeah, that's it.
yeah. So she has a chapter in there where she talks about why some cultures are more synergistic and some are more hostile. And then a great book, a great entire book. This book was so important to me. Erich Fromm's Anatomy of Human Destructiveness.
Yep.
Absolutely crucial book. My mom gave that to me for my birthday one year, which pretty much says everything you know about my relationship with my mom. Yeah, it was fabulous, fabulous book. And one of the things he does in there is discuss, you know, a range of culture. I just finished reading a book by Peggy Reeves Sanday about a range of how women are treated in different traditional cultures. And again, that's runs the gamut from gang rape being absolutely standard part of life to rape at all being pretty much unthinkable. And
right.
Right.
And
so
this
again,
is an important point.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say that so it's not that civilization made us better. Civilization has well, one of the things that civilization has certainly done is there's a great line by, God, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's basically a military or strategic analyst, sort of a State Department analyst type. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he said, the West always thinks it won the world through the strength of its ideas, but it didn't. It won the world through the application of organized violence. And,
well, you know what? Winston Churchill said we should not be so naive to think that others like what we've done because we've won the world through violence. But you guys shouldn't be so naive that they might hate us for having done this. That's a direct quote. It's in a book called something to the Dardanelles. That book, same idea. This is imperialism.
Yeah, and so it's oh, and there's as long as we're throwing out quotes, and as long as I'm butchering quotes, there was this guy who said, oh, all that democracy stuff is really good for at home, but out here in the colonies, it's pure power. He said it better than that.
That sounds like George Kennan.
Yeah, it wasn't George Kennan. It was a British guy. Like, but yeah, Kennan said the same thing. And that's, so one of the reasons that so many of us don't see the violence every day is because we're living inside a gated community.
Right.
And, you know, for me, the US military is the gatekeepers around the whole thing.
Sure.
And so we don't see it because the violence is done in those villages that you talked about in Africa. It's done to the non-humans. And nonetheless, we should never forget that that it does come with a cost.
Well, I think that we went over a lot of ground here, and One thing you said earlier, I think it was Sam Harris, one philosopher, had said something about us knowing more. We do have more knowledge today, but as far as like information and all of that, and I think more knowledge. But here's the problem: if I fill my head full of, say, all the intricacies of Zeus and Hera, what what does that do for me having to deal with the actual real world? Now, there may be some mythology that we can understand, but what I'm saying is,
Oh
without
my
knowing
God.
history,
Last night, Will Smith slapped,
I saw it.
what's his name? What's his name?
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. My point is that you and I are on opposite sides of the planet, and I can say Will Smith slapped, and you know what I'm talking about. So yes, there's that, but it's also kind of, those are kind of just garbage floating in our head.
It's erroneous, right?
Sherlock Holmes, fictional character, of course, but at one point, Watson made a joke about Sherlock Holmes not knowing that the earth went around the sun. And Sherlock Holmes is like, how does that actually affect me? And
Right.
so, yeah, we do have more knowledge in some ways.
More information.
More information. Sorry, you're absolutely right. Sorry about that. We have more information in some ways, but
Someone said
that, out loud, I can tell you the lyrics to all sorts of crappy pop songs from the 1970s.
I can too. Yeah.
And that is one form of information, but there are other. This is actually kind of a huge thing. I know we were going to shut down, but it's a few years ago. I was in the car, listening to the radio, and it was some NPR person interviewing some rock star who had gone to like Inner Mongolia or somewhere and played rock music for teenagers who had never heard Western music before. And they were both, the interviewer and the rock star were both saying how cool this was, that the kids were responding viscerally to the power chords. They were doing something to their bodies, and they're moving and they're hearing it. And on one level, that shows the power of music, which I think is an extraordinary, cool thing, but it's horrifying because music opens you up, and then you can have, it wasn't AC/DC who went to Mongolia, but you can have kids opened up and then all of them be chanting, "I'm on the highway to hell." And I'm not meaning to come across as a sort of Christian type, oh, rock and roll is evil. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that traditionally in a lot of those communities that we talked about, music is a really important way to transmit culture. And Jeanette Armstrong, Okanagan Indian writer, was telling me about how in the spring they will do a dance, a communal dance, where everybody is making motions of bundling reeds together. And he said what they're really doing is they're talking about bundling the community. And, Bill McKibben made this point in a book he wrote, The Age of Missing Information, where he had a chapter on watching dance shows and how dances, there are so many dances that are basically about sublimated sex. And there's all sorts of dances about shaking your booty. But he said, and I love this that he did this. He said, where are the dances for the harvest? Where are the dances for the community? Where are the dances? And he didn't say this, but I would say, where are the dances for the sand? Like, I went on a tour, a local Tolowa Indians are the people whose land I live on. And a Tolowa historian was taking a bunch of us around to some various sites. And at one point he sang a salmon welcoming song. And how different it would be if instead of singing about, I'm on the highway to hell, or singing, I'm on top of my baby and my baby's on top of me, instead you're singing about a love song to the salmon. And I mean, that's one thing I love about the singer Dana Lyons is he sings love songs to nature. And there's other singers who do too. But my point is I have hot-blooded check and see. I've got a fever burning inside of me, stuck in my head from 1978. And that's I don't know why I hijacked us to go that direction. It's just that. What were you saying before I interrupted you?
Well, I think what you're talking about is that information and knowledge and what we have, and then basically you're talking about how it's applied. Well, certainly sex is a very deep thing for human beings, but why does it have to be 80 or 90% of everything that's on the internet or whatever? You know, it's funny that when I was in South Korea, one of my friends told me as I was learning Korean language, they were talking about passion, sexual passion. And he said, you know what we call that? We call that hot mind. I thought that was really good. But going back, you said something earlier about the fact, or the people who think that the sun goes around the earth and this kind of thing. And actually, not only does the earth move going around the sun, it also moves on its axis. So it moves in two different directions. Why is this important? And people have asked me this before. Why should they know it? And I said, it's not so much that you actually know that particular thing, because you can learn that from, the seasons and so forth and so on. And you can watch as a lunar eclipse, occurs, you can see the arc of the earth. You can see that the earth is round. And yeah, I mean, we can figure that out. That's not so important. The important part is how do we come to knowledge together, not as an individual. As an individual revelation, that's authority, which is fine for the individual. But when we come to knowledge together, we use the scientific method. And that's why we should know that, say, in Job 10, when it talks about the sun stopping as it's going around the earth, that this is incorrect cosmology. And that's the issue.
Well, I think that's part of the issue. And then I would just add one thing to it, which is when we say knowledge coming together, I would include knowledge coming together, including our non-human neighbors. That's a part of the community too. And that we need to. Speaking of which, I'm going to have to go because there are some bears banging on my window.
They always do about this time. Okay, we'll get back together sometime.
Okay, thanks. It was really fun. Let's do it again.
Yep. Talk to you later.